Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today for Point of View. The Texas legislature has actually wrapped up another session. That happened on Monday. I thought it was so interesting that the last day of the legislature was actually a holiday, but it was. And it was sort of a mixed bag, I think, for fiscal conservatives and also those concerned about religious liberty and the sanctity of life. It was perhaps leaning positive, and we're going to talk with a couple of experts about it in the first hour of Point of View today. Now, if you don't live in Texas, I think you should not tune out, because Texas is so informative with regard to the challenges we face. We're considered a conservative state, but we have we do not have the ability to take that for granted. We have to protect and be vigilant with regard to the blessings that we have here in Texas. So don't tune out if you don't live in Texas. I know we've got people listening in other states. And then in the second hour, we're going to be joined by Caroline Harries. And she's got an organization called In Due Time. She ministers to women and men, really couples, dealing with infertility. And she'll update us on her ministry to those who are waiting to be parents. But first, Trayce Bradford from Texas Eagle Forum is going to join us at the bottom of the hour to talk about the legislature. But first, I want to speak with someone from an organization I highly respect, which is the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He is Jason Isaac, actually the Honorable Jason Isaac. His title there is Senior Manager and Distinguished Fellow of Life Powered. We're going to talk about what exactly that is, but certainly empowering people to live free. That's part of what this organization is about. And we're going to talk about the issues of economic freedom, which includes taxing and also regulation of businesses. Jason, thank you so much for being with me.
My pleasure, Penna. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we've wrapped up the legislature here, and a lot of people don't realize that in Texas, the legislature meets every other year, which in itself, I think, says something about this state's traditional view of government, that you don't want to allow it too much power, correct?
That's absolutely right, and it's a model of limited government that should be replicated around the world. I've got a great campaign slogan, Make America Like Texas, and we've got the 10th largest economy, maybe the 9th largest economy in the world, and you look in the United States, we're probably the 3rd largest economy in the United States, but our per capita size of government is in the 40s, I think around 47, which means we've got a small, limited government. That's why we have so much prosperity here. People think it's laughable that we have over a $200 billion budget, and we meet every other year and do that budget for 2 years. And that's the government that serves people best, is when you have this limited form of government. So if you're listening and you're not in Texas, when you do move here, just make sure you vote accordingly. But it's a model of government that should be duplicated and replicated around the world.
I might mention that Jason Isaacs is a fourth-generation Texan, and he was elected 4 times as state representative for Hays and Blanco counties in the Texas Hill Country. It's so beautiful there. And some of the legislation he passed reduced taxes, strengthening election integrity, improving public education. All of these things are issues that we still deal with, Jason. And we're so glad that there are people like you, not only in government, but also in these groups like Texas Public Policy Foundation, that are doing research and providing information to those in public office. That is absolutely necessary, and I'm glad that you've dedicated your time out of government to that.
Yeah, it's excellent. I say this is the best session for me personally this decade because I wasn't there. So I served the previous 4 terms in the legislature between 2011 and 2019, just earlier this year. And then when swearing in, my term ended. And so it was great for me to be outside the rails for the first time this decade and see things from a different perspective and be a part of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, who I was very aware of at my time in the legislature because I relied heavily on their research. Now my time outside of the legislature says, gosh, I really wish I'd taken more heed into what they were recommending because I see the research that goes into it and how brilliant the minds are. Here, over 100 people, the largest state-based think tank in the country and the largest think tank outside of Washington, D.C., really driving the principles of limited government, individual responsibility, and free enterprise. And that's basically prosperity for families and individuals in the state of Texas. And so it's great to be part of such an amazing team and play a small role. And I'm working on a project called Life Powered, which, real simple, is we're working to end poverty around the world. And when you end energy poverty, you end poverty. And we're making great strides. But there's a lot of policies that are being pushed in cities around the country that are trying to deny people access to energy. And that's frightening when you start to think about that, the cost that it'll lead to increasing and how that'll impact families. That's what ultimately led me into politics in the first place, just getting frustrated with taxing policy that was making it harder for me to provide for my family. And I was fortunate enough to get elected and serve and actually reduce that tax that was having a direct impact on businesses and families here in the state of Texas.
Well, it sounds like energy policy is a whole show we need to do with you because, around the world, I'm not kidding, because this is just really an exciting topic, I think, these days, because we're starting to see the proof is in the pudding, and there have been so many attacks on fossil fuels, which really hurts the poor around the world. But let me go to taxing. You brought it up, and this was really the biggest issue in looking forward to this session, was the idea, the possibility of actually reducing property taxes. Can you tell our listeners how that all turned out?
So it started out with the Texas Public Policy Foundation having a great proposal to limit our spending with a strict spending limit at 8%, which is the rate of population plus the rate of inflation, would have been 8%. Let's stay at 8%. Let's put a strict spending cap in, and everything above that, let's use to buy down property taxes. Which, if you'd have done that, the Texas Public Policy Plan, the property tax cut plan, we would have eliminated our maintenance and operation, the largest tax that we pay for property taxes. We would have eliminated that in 10 years. Well, we weren't successful in getting that done, and spending exceeded 8% significantly. There's about a 12.5% increase in spending as it is right now. Now, that probably will go down a little bit if the governor stays true to form, because we're in the veto period through June 16th, and the governor has line item veto authority in the budget. And I think last legislative session he cut over $200 million in spending from the budget. That's not going to bring us below the 8% growth unless he cuts a significant portion of the budget. So we're going to see an increase in spending above population and inflation. Again, right now it's 12.5%. The good news is, and yes, there is some good news, is we're seeing $5 billion appropriated to property tax cuts, which is we will and we should pay less in property taxes next year than we did this year. And that's a good thing for families. It's a great thing for cost of living. And when you have the smallest increase in cost, it hurts the least among us more than anyone else. And the inverse is true as well. It's going to benefit them significantly by being able to save a little bit more money, being able to afford a home. And that's what we really want to see as people achieve the American dream here in Texas. And when you start cutting property taxes, then more people are going to realize that dream of home ownership.
Not only did we cut property tax, excuse me, I got to jump in. We've got a break, but we've cut and also reformed property tax. And so we're going to explain that, sort of that difference and why both of those things are important. We'll do that after the break. I'm so glad to be able to wrap up the Texas legislature and talk about the wins and the losses and the things left to be done with Jason Isaacs from Texas Public Policy Foundation. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The plight of persecuted Christians is worse than ever. That is the conclusion of a recent report by Aid to the Church in Need. It documents that persecution of Christians today is worse than at any time in history. Not only are Christians more persecuted than any other faith groups, but ever-increasing numbers are experiencing the very worst forms of persecution. In some countries, the situation is already severe, so it's hard to imagine how it could be any worse. Other countries, like China, have seen intolerance on the rise, as evidenced by a clampdown on dissident clergy and the destruction of churches. In light of this, I was deeply convicted by my recent interview with Johnny Moore. He came on Point of View to talk about his book, The Martyr's Oath. He begins the book, and we began our interview by talking about attending a Bible school graduation ceremony. The students repeated this martyr's oath in which they pledged their lives and death to Jesus. He felt like he was standing in the book of Acts, witnessing a raw first-century Christianity that had been shielded from him in America. It says things like, "As he has given his life for me, so I'm willing to give my life for him. I will use every breath I possess to boldly proclaim his gospel." It later goes on to say, "Though persecution may come, I know my battle is not against flesh, but against the forces of evil. I will not hate those whom God has called me to love. Therefore I will forgive when ridiculed, show mercy when struck, and love when hated." Johnny Moore often asks himself, why are so few of us in America willing to live for Jesus when others are so willing to die for him? It's a good question all of us should ask ourselves. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Jason Isaac is with me. He's with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and he has also served in the legislature in Texas, so he knows whereof he speaks. And Jason, we talked about $5 billion in tax relief, property tax relief, but there's also the second component, which is, maybe they could reduce it, but then, it can just kind of turn around and inch back up. But there's reform with regard to tax increases, both for cities and counties, and then also for school districts, isn't there?
That is absolutely correct, and this is great because we're actually constraining the growth of government, something that I've been trying to do this entire decade, and the legislature had some success this time at constraining the growth of government. So school districts can only raise their revenue 2.5% without triggering an election. So if you go above 2.5% for the schools, you're going to trigger an election. That's currently in statute at 8%. And so you'd see school districts around the state increase their revenues by 7.99%, by 8% because increase in valuations. They could have gone above that if they wanted to. It just triggers an election. But for some reason, there are some people that fear elections. I never did. I went through 5 elections, never had an issue with any kind of fear or concern whatsoever. I knew it was in his plans, and it worked out. And it was always in a win-win. And so schools, that trigger is 2.5% for all other municipalities. So whether it's cities or counties or emergency services districts, any taxing entity, their revenue growth trigger is at 3.5%. So you stay below that amount. And I'll use the city of Austin for an example. For the last 9 years, their revenue growth has been at 8% or 7.99%, which is where they set their cap at. And that's because they don't want to have an election because they fear the voters. And now If you want to go above 3.5% with any municipality or government entity other than schools, you go above 3.5%, you're going to have an election. And the city of Austin's already coming out saying they're going to have to go to voters and ask for more money because they just can't control their appetite for bigger government. And that's what we need more than anything is we need smaller government, which means bigger people, more freedom for the people. And so I'm super excited and very proud of the legislature for passing those triggers at 2.5% and 3.5%.
It's really good news. There's something else that I noticed, Jason, that I think is good news, and that is, we are proud of the fact here in Texas we don't have a state income tax, but there still was the possibility that, I guess, backdoor you could implement one, and now there's actually been something that I guess was introduced and passed that makes an income tax almost impossible. Well, it's going to go to the voters, right?
Absolutely. This November on the constitutional election, which typically has about 10 to 12% turnout, it's a low turnout election.
So people that really care.
Yeah, people that really care and study this issue, and I hope some of your listeners that live in Texas and are registered voters here will go and vote and support this measure to make it harder for the legislature to implement an income tax. Because now it'll be a constitutional ban on an income tax. And to reverse that, you'd have to have bills introduced in both the House and the Senate. You'd have to have a 2/3 majority of both bodies and the governor signing off. And then it would go to the voters again if there was ever going to be an income tax. So we want to get this almost permanent ban on a state income tax to put it into the Constitution so that we're really tying the hands of future legislators that they've got to live within their means and can't come to us in the form of an income tax. So this is great. We need to get this in our Constitution. This is an amendment I would certainly support. I would love it at the federal level as well. I don't think we're going to be so lucky there. But again, Texas is leading and the rest of the world should follow.
Jason, back in January, I went to the Texas Public Policy Foundation conference down in Austin, and I heard from
our policy orientation.
Oh, it was just great. And I heard from speaker after speaker talking about how cities are trying to put regulations on businesses, and then the state has to come back now in the legislature and consider how to stop the cities from regulating our businesses. What happened in the legislature with regard to that?
Well, we had a good success in 2017. Every single city, municipality, city government was putting these transportation network ordinances in to the benefit of a few older, archaic businesses and for the benefit of unions. And so we had to override that and put a statewide approach into transportation network companies, a la Uber and Lyft. And so now, if you're an Uber driver or you're the company itself, you've got one statewide approach, not this patchwork quilt of regulations that you have to deal with from every municipality. And so to put that into perspective, I serve the city of San Marcos. And so if you had someone driving for Uber in San Marcos and they take someone to Austin, they're now living under and operating under different regulations and different restrictions.
Wow.
And so you have to get a background check in the city of Austin. You have to get one in San Marcos. You've got to get one in Kyle Butte, San Antonio, because you never know where your fare may take you or your passenger may take you. And so we put a statewide approach in there. We tried to do the same thing. The legislature tried to do the same thing. Texas Public Policy Foundation was very supportive in pushing efforts regarding employment compensation. Shouldn't the companies decide how they're going to compensate their employees, whether it's 2 weeks off of work, whether it's maternity leave for both men and women? The companies should decide that. But you have cities that are out there passing these paid sick leave ordinances, which directly influence and impact your pay. So if you're sick, you get paid time off. You get paid for not producing anything for your company. But if you're healthy, you just get the same amount of pay. So you have people that are healthy that are getting paid, and you have people that are unhealthy that are sick, and they're getting paid as well. And it's just telling businesses what to do, how to do it.
Some businesses might want to do that, but other businesses are small and cannot do it, and cities should not be telling them how to run their business or, putting them out of business sometimes with these regulations.
Absolutely. You see the businesses leaving Austin because of property taxes. They're leaving Austin because of the overreaching ordinances that are really based on misguided principles, not to the benefit of the employees. When people raise minimum wages, what do? They innovate, and that's why you're seeing more and more fast food restaurants go to computer tellers and computer programs. I've seen it overseas before where they have this great, hey, we've got a $15 minimum wage. There's no one working at the counters anymore because the businesses are adapting. And so people lose when you start to force them to raise their wages and benefits. And in this case, because of a lawsuit filed by and won by the Texas Public Policy Foundation. The courts agreed with the Austin paid sick leave ordinance, and that's still working its way through the court system. But initially, we won that case. And now what's going to happen, because the legislature didn't reaffirm this, we're going to have to go and sue every single city that's putting these paid sick leave ordinances in, costing taxpayers more money in fighting lawsuits because of misguided and bad policy decisions.
So this was sort of unfinished business. Let's put it that way. Something that the legislature failed to do this time that really would have helped.
Correct. Yeah, they just unfortunately did not get the paid sick leave ordinance across the finish line this session.
Okay, now I see something about a Save Our Lemonade Stands bill.
Yes. Yeah, I think it was this Matt Krause that had worked on this from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a former colleague of mine, good friend, had areas where the city were shutting down kids from selling lemonade because they were selling without a permit. You know, this is something that my wife knows too well because she's worked on a food pantry in Dripping Springs, involved with the food pantry for years. And people would have baked goods, and they'd try to bring their baked goods to the Dripping Springs Helping Hands food pantry. And my wife, Carrie, would have to say, I'm sorry, we can't accept that because it wasn't made in a commercial-grade kitchen, because it doesn't have regulations. So you have people that are trying to provide food for the most needy, but a food pantry can't take it because of government regulations. And that's what was happening with these lemonade stands around the state, cities saying, sorry, we're shutting you down, kids, because you're trying to sell lemonade because you don't have a permit to operate a restaurant. And it's just absurd. And so there is the Lemonade Freedom Act, I think it was called,
right.
Passed, and hopefully the governor will sign that into law, maybe at a lemonade stand near you, so that we can celebrate young entrepreneurs getting out there and hustling and just trying to make a dollar to help their families out and help themselves learn great lessons.
Jason, we're coming up on the end of our time together, but can you give a quick comment about the budget and the budget that was passed? What's your take on it?
Yeah, it was upsetting because it was such an increase in expenses. You know, I've been a part of a legislature where we've had an incredible shortfall. And then this time the spending seemed to increase a little too high. I would have loved to see it stick around 8% or less, but to go up 12.5% was unfortunate because we could have seen more money for tax relief. And this was a great opportunity to, eliminate margins taxes. We eliminated the legislature eliminated the driver responsibility program, which was this continuous fine and payment that people had to pay for speeding violations or other traffic violations, where it just kept hammering them. And so they replaced the funding that was generated from that. They banned red light cameras and will let the current contracts run out, but replace the funding for that. And so, that's kind of my only complaint so far is the larger issues with the spending just seem to be a bit much. I hope next session we've got a great conservative legislature that's there that says we need a strict spending cap, and anything else that we bring in, we're going to go and buy down property taxes so that people can actually afford to live in their homes and are not forced out of their homes from local taxing entities. Sounds
like a great plan. Jason Isaac, thank you so much for joining me today. You've been very informative. We'll have to have you back.
I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me on, Penna. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, they cut taxes, but they increased spending. A mixed bag. We'll be back with Trayce Bradford from Texas Eagle Forum.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
And we are taking the first hour of the program today to wrap up the Texas legislature, what happened there. It ended on Monday, and here we are on Wednesday, and there's so much we will not be able to cover it in this hour. But I do want to mention that coming up at the top of the hour, we're going to be joined in studio by Caroline Harries, and her organization is In Due Time, and also Moms in the Making. And she really deals in the area of infertility, providing hope and encouragement in the waiting for children. And so it'll be a good half hour speaking with her. And I want you to stay with us and call in too if you're dealing with that issue. With me now is Trayce Bradford. She is president of Texas Eagle Forum, and that's one issue Trayce did not deal with. She's got 7 children. She's homeschooled them. And throughout, she's remained active in public policy. As I said, she's president of Texas Eagle Forum. She was president before that of Dallas Eagle Forum, and she founded Tarrant County Eagle Forum in 2012. She and her husband have been great friends of Point of View. And Trayce, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, all session, I know that we had you on before the session started or early on, and I've been watching all your updates, and I haven't hosted that many days, so I've been anxious to have you on, and now the session's over and we've got you here. I'm so glad we have you here to wrap it up. But you have been really diligent about providing information about some issues that I think people would not have known about. One of those was right at the end. You were working on Sunday with the session ending Monday on human trafficking. Tell us what happened with that bill.
That was a bill that was HB 1257, and it was to help expand the Attorney General's office, the ability for them, after a county had the chance to look at a particular trafficking case first, then it would give the OAG's office an opportunity to go in and help prosecute, or concurrently, or go in and prosecute these trafficking cases. And I was surprised to find, I think the percentage was 19% is what is being prosecuted for these trafficking cases. So that was something that we felt we really wanted to get behind. We looked through the bill. We talked to groups that work with the trafficking victims, and something that really stuck with me right away is, these people that are trying to get away from this are these victims that if they see that the person that's the perpetrator is going to get off, either they feel, what's the point? And it really is a hampering to them moving forward, or they're fearful because they're afraid there's going to be retribution for them pulling out, and then these people, they may get arrested, but then the cases are never followed through. So that was something that a lot of the groups that deal with human trafficking and the aftermath of these women and children and men, but mostly women, they were hoping to see this pull through. And there was one woman testified, an incredible testimony of what this would have meant for her.
So it didn't ultimately pass?
No, ma'am, it died at the last. Actually, I think it was pulled down because there were some issues they were concerned about at the very end. So, the maneuvers that happen.
That's what I love about Texas Eagle Forum. You're always on. You're vigilant, and I know things come up that you don't expect. And one of the biggest issues that came up this time that I don't think we didn't talk about this at all when we talked before the legislature was all these bills about mental health. And they were having to do with school safety, but there's definitely we want to shore up our schools and prevent things like the Santa Fe shooting. But this turns into just a behemoth. Tell us how. I know there were a couple of big bills you were working on, so tell us about those and what happened with them.
It's interesting you use that word behemoth, because that was the first word that popped in my head when I started looking at these. And actually, you're right. This was not on our radar. We had a whole list of items, and a lot of those, were things that we really felt were critical, and some of them, like campus free speech, some of those things did move, but we had to end up really turning and focusing on, at one point, you could search mental health on the Texas Legislative Outreach or Outline online, where you can go read the bills, and you could find over 400 references to mental health.
Wow.
Yeah. And when we pulled up, I was actually say we, because my cohort was a woman named Cindy Asmussen, and we were pretty much joined at the hip on this. Neither one of us saw this coming. And we sat there the day the governor laid out his priorities, and we heard mental health, and we both kind of looked at each other and pulled our phones out, and we started searching. And we just saw bill after bill already that early in the session. And
they were ready.
They were ready. And SB 10 was one that caught our attention right away. That was the one that set up a consortium of all the psychiatric chairs for these major colleges. And people said, well, how did you know this was an issue? And I said, I don't know about you, but when I see what's been going on college campuses and some of the nonsense that's being played out and being taught as truth, that immediately jumped out at me, that you're going to organize a consortium pulling from these folks that right now, from a family, pro-life, pro-biblical truth, I just didn't have a comfort with that, let alone the fact when you start looking at where all this was heading, it became very disconcerting. And we could see that, they moved that bill, and then people said, well, all 31 senators signed on to that. It was 31-0.
Wow.
And, the interesting thing to the group of us, and it became a very interesting patchwork of groups, because we are not necessarily all on the same page on other issues, but for some reason this issue drew us all together. And, we all said, that's not a positive to us.
But it was to some conservatives, some quote-unquote conservatives in the legislature were pushing this, weren't they?
Uh-huh. Yeah, and our response back was, we took time. I'm not saying that they did not, but, you're looking at some volunteer moms, and that's what we were called at one point, just mom activists. And you kind of go, okay.
Powerful moms.
I don't think they realize is one of the first things we do is go and find people. What I love about Eagle Forum, when you go to their council meetings, I leave there with almost too much stuff in my head. They bring in some of the nation's experts. And so I was able to immediately reach out to some of these people who were so gracious to respond to us, and they were watching Texas. And these are people that have been working on some of this stuff, like a lot of this mental health stuff, if you start really breaking down and go line by line in the bill, which we did, and when we were asked what some of our issues were, we sent back a list where we actually said, please, if you could remove these lines. We wanted all of it except for the hardening of the schools gone. This is too big a move from the standpoint of large government, from the standpoint of encroachment on parental rights, from the standpoint of children's privacy. The list go on and on. Seriously, we could talk for days on that.
Okay, so let me just be clear in my head. The hardening of the schools was part of this whole agenda for making schools safer, and there was no problem with that. But when we go to mental health, you had this consortium, and it was connecting Texas school children with mental health services, expanding telemedicine for students, and encouraging research. And connecting children with mental health care providers. And there were some concerns about, for instance, provision of drugs, provision or undermining of parental rights, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. And, that was exactly right. We would never want to stand in the way of proactive hardening of schools. What are some of that is laid out in SB 11. Some of the legislative gymnastics that got the monster of SB 10 amended on to SB 11 at the last hour was very disheartening, which you brought. And one thing I want to make clear is when something was removed from SB 11 and we were told, well, no, mental health providers or non-professional mental health advisors would not be contacting students, well, then you just need to read HB 18. So
there's several bills.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay,
there
let me
were,
jump
and they
in,
were
Tracey. We've got to kind of explain this a little bit more, and also I want your take on what ended up passing, what's good about it, and what's bad about it, what we need to be watching for. Because, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of times when there is an issue, then there's people that have an agenda that are all ready to come in and build government, grow it, to the degree where the issue itself could have been dealt with in a different way. And I fear that's what's happening here. And sometimes people don't see it. But this is the beauty of Texas Eagle Forum actually across the country, because Tracey mentioned information. They have a lot of it, and they do their research. This is a powerful group, mostly of moms, but they're powerful moms. We'll be right back with more of Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. There is some terminology that's been bandied about with regard to these mental health bills. For instance, and I'll have Trayce Bradford from Texas Eagle Forum sort of define these terms. One is trauma-informed learning. One is threat assessment teams. Another is emotional learning. And Trayce Bradford has been watching these bills. Tracey, first of all, tell us how many bills passed on this topic.
The ones that we know so far that we were really tracking was HB 11, which also had HB 10 amended onto it. SB. Those were both SB Senate bills. HB 18 and HB 19. We know there are some others but I do believe HB 10, which was a very disconcerting research bill, ended up not making it. And there were others that are little pieces, but the bigger ones that actually go in, I don't think people realize, and I didn't, that these bills go in and change the education code.
Wow.
So this isn't just, we're not just, I think the thing that's so difficult and what was really chilling to me is when you have the bills in the House and you're talking about a massive shift of how we're going to view children. Because what they're looking at is they're wanting to train these teachers on trauma-informed care. And you ask that question, what is trauma-informed care? What is social-emotional learning? These are things that not even the psychiatric world agrees on. We see that time after time with it, they will say themselves, there are 9 or 10 definitions. There was an NPR article that said they can't even decide what is absolutely trauma-informed care. It's this fluid notion, yet that's being added to and emboldened in our education code. And is it on its face a bad thing? No. But when you start looking into the blueprint of how they'll implement it, this is something really I think is so important. And what got missed is whether it's with this or adverse childhood experiences, which is another buzzword, and
These all sound like
assessment.
a lot of investigation into what's happening at home with the family being done by school authorities.
And they are actually wanting to input the data on these assessments. And what they say, and here's what people need to understand, the groups that are pushing this, they are proud of this stuff. They are not quiet. They don't hide it. And you can go look on websites and see their assessments. You can see where they're driving to. And one of the things that really struck me over and over were the norms. What are social and emotional norms? We will have children take an assessment to determine what adverse child experiences they have had. And some of these are very real, and some of them, the questions were, did your parent ever insult you? So it runs the gamut of that to things I wouldn't even want to repeat in public.
So then this is all a part of their record?
Now, they will, the way they use the ACEs is you can actually take this, into the data, because everything's moving to a record of data. And so who's setting the norms? So when they say we want social emotional norms, who's setting those norms? Well, if you look at the blueprint that one of the legislators held up in a hearing and said, this is the blueprint we would use for trauma-informed care, there's an entire section on how we need to normalize the LGBTQ movement and why those relationships should be normalized. So you're taking away from parents, not just religious ability to train their children, but also, it's the mentality when you start looking through. We haven't even touched on some of the other terminology, but the biggest flag is they will say, no, it's parental consent. Well, you look at the governor's Twitter project, and not Twitter like tweet and Twitter, but there's a telemedicine project through one of the studies they did through Texas Tech. And we looked at the parental form, and we looked at when you sign this, and the word may is in there, not shall, so why wouldn't they protect? Like we shall, the parental rights shall be protected, not may be protected. Why is could the information be released if they determined that this research was benefit for the common good, for the community?
So are you satisfied with the consent that's required for some of this, or are you not satisfied with it?
No, I'm not. And I think that was one of our biggest complaints, and some of even the talking points that were discussed on the floor of the House don't line up with even talking to, we went and talked to attorneys. We talked to people that have been in this bill for 20 years, why we want informed parental consent. We have examples here in Fort Worth where consent forms were sent home, parents signed them. They said Johnny or Susie would be learning about this on a particular day. A couple of parents felt uncomfortable. They pushed back. They finally got the curriculum, and it was terrible, horrific, of what their kids were being taught. And then you as a parent can't even combat that because you didn't know that was happening.
Let me ask one more question before we get to the end of the segment, and that is,
Sure.
I'm sorry, finish your sentence.
I was just going to say, there's a reason to be leery as a parent in this day and age. I mean, I just think that's kind of practical advice as a parent.
Yeah.
You don't hand over your child, and now with things being collected, data points being collected, and that's something that's been talked about over and over. So as a parent, that will always be one of my first concerns. But even some of the language did not go far enough.
Trayce, let me ask you. Well, what about clinics? I saw that I saw some mention of clinics on the campuses. So it's almost. I don't know if that ended up being prohibited or if that's going to be proliferating now.
Now that was a piece that was in HB 18. So yes, that is something that now they will say we were told, and I want to say I do believe that. The concern we had was there was no fight. There was no pushback on the floor of the House. These bills to make this massive shift, to have clinics, they're saying these are not something you have to do, but strongly suggest that you do. And if it's in the Safety Act, which is SB 11, wouldn't you opt to do that? If that's part of what they consider hardening your schools, both from that perspective and the mental health perspective. That got roped in. I mean, we had a guy do an analysis and said more children are killed by accidents than suicide or shootings, and we don't have an accident consortium. So, I mean, the move here was so big and so swift. I feel like we've done a disservice to our families, to our kids, and for people. We are looking for safety. We do want our children protected. And I don't think these were bad motives. I think it was, let's just move. And when they did, and no one stood up really to push back, you feel pretty helpless.
No, it's overkill, and it's certainly. I think there's been an agenda all along with regard to how to use the schools. I mean, we've battled this for decades.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And this was one opportunity here in Texas. So, I mean, it sounds like perhaps there were some safeguards put on it, but for the most part, it's out there. It's pretty scary. How it's going to play out is not necessarily known. But again, you're going to be required to be vigilant, Trayce, you and Texas Eagle Forum, and we're so grateful that you're there watching these things and informing us. And certainly after the legislature's over, now we watch how it plays out, don't we?
Yes, ma'am. And I would encourage parents. I know we do this, but I would really encourage. We're going to have to be the voice for our children, and we may even have to be the voice for some of the neighbor kids or the children that don't have anybody. You know, that's a concern. There are going to be children swept up in this that don't have a voice.
Trayce Bradford from Texas Eagle Forum, thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It is constant vigilance that's required. I remember one official in the Clinton administration said, "Let no crisis go to waste." Well, the left is not doing. We'll be right back.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very interesting topic later in the program. The College Board, the organization that administers the Scholastic Aptitude Test, the SAT, has made a big change. We used to rely on the SAT as sort of a benchmark for colleges to tell how students will do. Well, now the SAT is expanding. They have a new system that assigns takers of the SAT a new score to tell college admissions officers whether each student taking it was privileged, whether they come from rich parents and good neighborhoods and schools, or are they disadvantaged, come from poor families in high crime neighborhoods. In other words, it's an adversity criteria for colleges, and it totally takes the value of the SAT out of the equation. We are going to speak with Lowell Ponte about it. You won't want to miss that. That's in the next hour of the program. But I've been looking forward to my in-studio guest today. She comes here maybe every year to update us on her wonderful, wonderful ministry. And her name is Caroline Harries. I love this description of her. She has a heart for those who are waiting on breakthrough from the Lord. Her unwavering faith is evident as she believes for her own miracle of children. So we're talking about waiting for a child. Caroline's ministry is Moms in the Making. She has a blog and book called In Due Time. I love the names. Caroline, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you again for having me.
Well, I love having you. And I noticed that you are so, in a sense, you're building your ministry. You started out with a blog. And then I think it was maybe the next year or two, you wrote a book, In Due Time, which I have a copy of here. It's devotions for people who are waiting, actually on all kinds of breakthroughs, not just children. And then you started a conference, an annual national conference. And then after that, now you have implemented a podcast, which I listened to last night. All of these are encouraging people's faith. And of course, the issue that's motivated you is waiting for a baby or babies that just haven't come yet, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it really kind of all came out of my journey to wanting and desiring children. But my heart goes way beyond that as well. And so a lot of what I do with the podcast and my blog and book is encourage anyone who's waiting on something.
Well, when I first met you and I read some of the comments you would make, and you would be so transparent about what it is like to be facing infertility or the possibility of infertility and just waiting for a child, knowing you're in the age group, your friends are having babies, and feeling a little bit isolated. And I think that's a common thought and feeling, isn't it?
Absolutely. They say 1 in 8 women go through infertility. And so it's something that's so much more common. But I think it's who's going to actually talk about it. And I'm someone who's willing to talk and share and provide a safe and encouraging place for women to come and receive hope and encouragement.
So tell us about your conferences, because I know that they are helping women and people are buying plane tickets and coming to Dallas to go.
They are, yeah. So we had our first one in 2017, and we've had one again in 2018, and our one this year will be this October. And last year and the year before, we were having women coming from over 30 states, someone from Africa and Bahamas. And so we've really just built a presence online just through social media. And we know the power of social media, of course, now in this day and age. And people are hungry, and I think they see that we carry hope. And that we don't just make it about a baby, we make it about pursuing God in the wait. And I think people are hungry for that.
So how, just personally, I mean, you've said in so many different ways in the things that I've read that you've written, that you've grown through this experience, that the trials and the sadnesses and the hardships have actually been part of your spiritual growth. In fact, probably a big part.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's been everything. I think we're all faced with hardship, whether it's infertility, divorce, a bad, cancer diagnosis, whatever it is. And at the end of the day, we all have a choice of how we're going to choose to act in those situations. And I've just chosen to run to the Father in it all and just seek Him. And it's been a choice, but I've chosen to opt in to making the most of the wait. For me, my husband and I are about 7 years into our journey for desiring babies. And I just, from the very beginning, decided whether I'm waiting 1 month or 7 years or 10 years, I don't want it to be wasted. I want to make the most of this time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can call us, because one thing Caroline does is she makes appointments through her ministry to take calls from people who are struggling or who have questions. And so if you have a question or comment, or if you're waiting, if you're waiting for the blessing of a child, that miracle, it's always a miracle. Give us a call at 800-351-1212. Our phones are open, and we want you to know that you have that ability to call and speak with Caroline. She's helped so many people. So a few weeks ago, when we decided to kind of book this interview, it was National Fertility Awareness Week. What happens during that week, and what do you do that's special?
Yeah, so really it's just a place to, I think most kind of organizations have an awareness week or an awareness month, and the same holds true for infertility. For us, our heart was really to come at it from a different aspect of, yes, women go through infertility, but guess what? You don't have to do it alone. Or, hey, in this, infertility doesn't have to be your identity. Your identity can still be rooted in Christ. And so really we use the week to spread that message of hope, of even, yes, our heart was to get the word out there about infertility, but it's so much more. And again, it doesn't have to be your identity.
Okay, so because of all kinds of medical breakthroughs, a lot of people are actually able to conceive now that we're not. There's certain technologies, procedures. So, and I know that you and your husband, Colby, have chosen not to do that. You've chosen to just place your faith in God and leave it in His hands. But yet you don't have, through your ministry, you are ministering to people that are going all along the spectrum of infertility procedures and technology, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. You have women who are doing IVF. Some might be using a surrogate. You have women who are going through secondary infertility, which is very common, meaning they had their first child fine, and then they're struggling to conceive with their second. Women who are using just different medications, and then people like me who aren't at all. And then there's, of course, so many who choose the route of adoption, which is beautiful and just, as an amazing of a story. And so it's beautiful. We just say, we're not as concerned with what your story is. We just want to love and support you along the way.
It's interesting you had mentioned secondary infertility. I mean, some people would say, and I think this is the case with all kinds of waiting, that people will give all kinds of advice to you, or to the person that's waiting. For instance, well, you should be happy with one. But, nothing helps when you're the one that has that desire. It's been implanted. It's a godly desire for children. Absolutely. And so when you have a godly desire, then you can go to your Father in heaven and tell Him about it. And I think you are so creative in the way that you encourage people to do that. There are so many ways to do that. And it becomes a daily, discipline.
It is.
Spiritual discipline built into someone's life. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I have an open line in case you would like to speak with Caroline. I'm going to continue this interview after the break. And we just want to encourage you, not only if you're waiting for a child, but whatever you're waiting for. There's something you're waiting for. There's something you desire. And there are so many ways you can get closer to Him in the waiting. We'll talk about it after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The plight of persecuted Christians is worse than ever. That is the conclusion of a recent report by Aid to the Church in Need. It documents that persecution of Christians today is worse than at any time in history. Not only are Christians more persecuted than any other faith groups, but ever-increasing numbers are experiencing the very worst forms of persecution. In some countries, the situation is already severe, so it's hard to imagine how it could be any worse. Other countries, like China, have seen intolerance on the rise, as evidenced by a clampdown on dissident clergy and the destruction of churches. In light of this, I was deeply convicted by my recent interview with Johnny Moore. He came on Point of View to talk about his book, The Martyr's Oath. He begins the book, and we began our interview by talking about attending a Bible school graduation ceremony. The students repeated this martyr's oath in which they pledged their lives and death to Jesus. He felt like he was standing in the book of Acts, witnessing a raw first-century Christianity that had been shielded from him in America. It says things like, "As he has given his life for me, so I'm willing to give my life for him. I will use every breath I possess to boldly proclaim his gospel." It later goes on to say, "Though persecution may come, I know my battle is not against flesh, but against the forces of evil. I will not hate those whom God has called me to love. Therefore I will forgive when ridiculed, show mercy when struck, and love when hated." Johnny Moore often asks himself, why are so few of us in America willing to live for Jesus when others are so willing to die for him? It's a good question all of us should ask ourselves. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let me just ask the question, and if you'd like to call in and share this with us, again, our number is 800-351-1212. Caroline Harries is my guest, and her book is In Due Time, and In Due Time refers, in her case, to waiting for a baby, for waiting to become pregnant and have a child, have a family. She and her husband have been waiting for 7 years for this, and they encourage others. But it really applies. The principles that she has learned to apply in her life and shares with others apply to lots of things you might be waiting for. You could be waiting for a baby. You could be waiting for a husband or a wife. You could be waiting for a job. Mm-hmm. You could be waiting for someone to come to know the Lord in your family or that's close to you. You could be waiting for peace in your life. So, if you want to share something like that with us, we would love to talk with you. And Caroline talks to people with all those issues and others. So the number's 800-351-1212. I know that a lot of people go to your blog that are certainly sad because a child hasn't come, but there are also a lot of people that just go to your blog for lots of reasons. I am blessed by it. And I noticed one blog post when I was going through things last night about you wrote a letter back to the mom who didn't have to wait. So there are moms of kids that are overstressed, and you're hearing from them. I think all moms that are waiting for a child hear from them, and they think, well, I wish I had your problem, mm-hmm. don't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting. Even we've seen hundreds and hundreds of babies that have come out of Moms in the Making of mm-hmm. women who are part of the group. And so what happens is we find out, well, they get their baby, but then what? If their identity wasn't in Christ, then they're like, oh my gosh, now I'm dealing with another issue because, I strongly believe that being a mom is going to be so much harder than this season of waiting, of just the responsibility of taking care of children when they're crying and screaming and you're tired. And so my heart with that was just hopefully it came across in a nice way of just writing a letter to the mom, who didn't go through infertility, who maybe got pregnant the first month and who is at home with screaming children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then teenagers and all the issues that go with them. And then as I have young people who are married with their own children now, who, constantly there's something coming up that we have to pray about or speak about or deal with. So, the principles that you teach, and I just love the way you do it. I love the way you do it, Caroline, because you do it with such love, and yet you're very truthful and honest. And so that's, I think that's needed today.
Yeah.
And I'm just grateful for your ministry.
Thank you. Yeah, I love just, for me, it always goes back to being rooted in the Word, that we have to know the Word of God. And I definitely don't sugarcoat things. I think there's so much fluff and puff right now, where it's all about how we feel. But for me, I'm like, I can't live by how I feel. I have to live by what God's Word says. And so that's kind of the message I like to spread.
One of the things that I've done in my devotional life is go to the Psalms. I find that the Psalms there's so much there that can help you through your prayers. And, you may not know where exactly your issue is, but there's so much general wisdom in the Psalms and things that you could pray word for word. I mean, even today, this morning, I was reading Psalm 71, and it was just in a lectionary from my church where they just take us through, various scriptures they recommend we read. And so here in Psalm 71, verse 14 and 15, I will hope continually, and I will add to all your praise. My mouth shall proclaim your righteousness, your salvation all the day, for I'm not acquainted with learning. In other words, we don't always understand why things are happening. I thought of my interview with you today. We don't always understand. I shall enter into the power of the Lord. O Lord, I shall remember your righteousness, yours alone. I mean, this is just today.
Absolutely. And I think so often as Christians, we're like, I don't know what to pray, but I think what you're sharing is perfect, because the best thing we can do is pray God's Word. I actually have a blog post. I think it's titled something like 10 Psalms to Pray When You Have No Words.
Great.
Because just what you're doing, it's just so powerful to just pray to God what he's, told us through his Word.
Yeah. So you told me that many people that you work with and deal with end up having a child. Their prayers end up being answered. What about the ones that don't?
Yeah. So, it's been interesting. I lead a group here in Dallas because we do have groups nationwide. And so I lead a group within my home. And so far, we've never had anyone come in who hasn't had a child. It's actually the opposite, where they're not just having one, they're having two.
Wow.
Or three or four. I think the most now is one of the girls has 4 children, which is just such a, an amazing testimony. Now, some of those journeys have been longer to get there, but we've just celebrated so much life. There was one girl recently who came in, and I still remember the first meeting. She just felt so much peace from the meeting. And she was like, I want the faith you have. And I told her, you can have it, because Romans 10:17 says faith comes by hearing, and the hearing comes by the Word of God. And so I've made a decision to spend time in the Word, and that's why I'm where I am today. And just a few months later, at the age of 40, with only 1 ovary and 1 tube, she found out she was naturally pregnant. And she just had her baby girl about a month ago. So it's just been just testimony after testimony. And I know I've shared this with you before, but even more so than the babies that have come, which is amazing, and obviously the desires of our heart, is the hearts that have come in and the minds that have come in and been healed and renewed. People who have just come in bitter or hurting or disappointed, and all of a sudden what you see is they now have a hunger for the Word of God. They have a hunger for a relationship.
Isn't that the way God works, though?
Oh, it's amazing.
We
It's
want
so
the
beautiful.
blessings of knowing Christ. We want the benefits. We want his plan, but we neglect to want him. And when our hearts begin to desire God only, it's amazing. He doesn't give us emptiness. He gives us a fullness of life, doesn't he?
Absolutely. I think he really is the gift of it all. You know,
Yes.
he is the gift. So, yeah.
Well, you've been so transparent, Caroline, with all the people that you minister to, and I want to talk a little bit about these groups because you mentioned you have one in Dallas. I think that was your first group.
It was.
And now it's multiplied, hasn't it?
It's wild. Yeah. So we now currently we have 22 groups across the United States. We're actually in the middle of the interview process right now. So it's looking like at the end of this month, we will have 32 groups in 20 different states. And it's happened fast. That's for sure.
That's great. And so then if you don't have a group in your city and you're not inclined to apply to be a leader, you can still participate.
You can still be a part. Yeah, we're very active on social media. We have a closed Facebook group that we discuss all things faith and fertility. But in addition, we have a virtual group. So it's basically an online webinar that you can join. You can see all the other members face to face. It follows the same format as our in-person groups. And what's beautiful is we've had, there was a girl in England who would wake up at 2 a.m. to join the group. So people from all over the world are a part of our virtual group as well.
We have Caroline's beautiful picture on our website at pointofview.net, and you can go there. You can click that and go through to her website. There's 2 websites, right? There's one for Moms in the Making and one for In Due Time. Tell us about how people can access the various ministries. And I forgot to mention also that you have a podcast, which I also want to encourage people to go to.
Yeah, so Moms in the Making is for women specifically going through infertility, and our website is momsinthemakingroup.com, or you can find us on social media at Moms in the Making. In Due Time, you could just Google In Due Time blog or my name, In Due Time blog Caroline, and that will come up. And all my social media handles for that are Trusting in Due Time. And then recently, a month ago today, launched a podcast with one of my good friends called A Cup Full of Hope. And that podcast is really just to share hope. You know, we believe hope is a person. He lives on the inside of us. So that is for anyone, men, women of all ages, just sharing hope and just truth and encouragement for all people.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to encourage you in this direction. We haven't had anyone call in, and I just didn't know if we would or not. Sometimes people are reticent to share these deep, private hurts in their lives. But I have to say I'm so grateful that you have, you may have been too, but you have definitely overcome that kind of an obstacle. And so I'm really grateful. I just continue to hope and pray for you that the Lord blesses you with a child.
Yes.
Because you've been so instrumental in helping others who are struggling through this. So thank you so much for coming in today to encourage people. And just thank you for what you do. You're a national treasure.
Oh, thank you. It's always a delight to share. So thanks again for having me.
That's Caroline Harries again. You can go to pointofview.net and click through to one of her websites, In Due Time. She also has a 60-day devotional book that boy, it would help anyone, really. It's just a great devotional, but especially if you're waiting for something, some kind of a blessing from the Lord. So, ladies and gentlemen, next up, we're going to continue with an open line. A little bit later, we're going to talk about the SAT. You won't want to miss all of that. We'll be back.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for sticking with us today, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. We have a multi-topic program today, and I do want to open up the phones right now. You can talk about your infertility issue if you would like to. That was a topic of our last segment, and Caroline Harris has gone on, and we're so grateful to her for her ministry and also for joining us today. But I do want to add a couple more topics to the list. One is one that we are going to discuss with a guest in the next hour. And it's, this is what the Wall Street Journal calls it, the new and unimproved SAT. And it's something called an SAT adversity score. And the Wall Street Journal says to level the socioeconomic field, the College Board, that's the group that administers the SAT, now plans to assign students something called an adversity score on their SAT admissions test. So you're not just answering the questions and getting your score, and, sometimes it's changed by how many you actually do answer. But they're going to give some people an advantage specifically because of their life circumstances or a disadvantage. This demographic handicap may instead fuel more public cynicism, says the Wall Street Journal, and harm middle-income kids, and that's what we worry about. The College Board's new adversity score will include 15 variables. For instance, the student's neighborhood crime, their neighborhood crime rate will be a variable. Their housing values and poverty will be a variable. Other variables, there's 15 of them altogether. They will feed into an algorithm, and there will be weights assigned to each one of these variables. Then you'll get a score that students won't be able to see or challenge before it goes to the colleges. So this is specifically to go to the colleges. It will shift their SAT score. If they've got a lot of adversity, it will raise it in the mind of the college and university. Do you have any thoughts on this first blush? We are going to have a guest and unpack it a lot more. But if you've seen information on this, news reports, and you want to comment, the number is 800-351-1212, and we can start talking about it now. Some schools have been seeking ways to qualify student socioeconomic challenges. And so this adversity score is meant to do that. Of course, sometimes schools will use race to do that, and it's thought that this is a better way to do it. It could also help compare similarly situated students. High-performing low- and middle-income students could likewise, says the journal, benefit from being compared to peers with similar means. But the new score is going to make college admission even less transparent, says the Wall Street Journal. The variables that go into the score will be based on census and proprietary College Board data. So the scores are not going to necessarily take into account individual circumstances or the character of the person. And so, that's a lot of it, too. Middle-class kids whose parents sacrifice to send them to private schools or move to neighborhoods with better public schools are actually going to lose out here. They will be scored as relatively privileged, and so they will not get the boost from the adversity score that somebody in a poor neighborhood or a worse school might get. Regardless of their own resources and opportunities, they might be compared to more affluent peers who have access to SAT prep, to tutors, and summer camps. So the score could prompt families to make perverse decisions. For instance, parents may refrain from moving to marginally wealthier neighborhoods or sending their kids to parochial schools. You can see what a mess this becomes, trying to manipulate the system. And I think the sad part about it, we'll talk about it with our guest Lowell Ponte a little bit later, but the SAT has actually been a pretty good indicator and predictor of how students are going to do in college. And so they're messing with it now. And so anyway, if you have comments on it, 800-351-1212. Something else I saw in the Wall Street Journal, that since we were talking about having children and infertility, let's talk a little bit about having little children, little babies. How do you handle work and and children. And this was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday under their work and family section. Paternity leaves starts with the boss. And I've been very amazed over the last decade or so at the companies that offer paternity leave for, dads, new dads of babies. And the dad didn't have anything to do with having the baby. And the dad works and the mom works, and they both get maternity and paternity leave, which seems only fair. But there's, again, as with many of these issues surrounding families, there are a lot of complexities. So this is what the Journal says. Well, actually, they talk about a couple of guys that own their own company, sort of a tech company, and what they did. And these guys took 3 months off for to be with their new babies, their newborns. And they're both the owners of the company, and they both did this at the same time. And so it was supposed to be an example for their employees to show them how that would work. And here's what the Journal says. Mindful of the benefits, many employers are expanding parental leave offerings for men and encouraging them to take it. One of my sons works for a tech company, and that company gives them 5 months paternity leave if they want to take it. He said he would never take it. And that's kind of what happens is there becomes, in a sense, a worry that if you take these benefits, even though they're offered, is this going to undermine your career? Is this going to hurt your advancement? Or if you can be away for that long, the company could certainly do without you. And these two guys that the Wall Street Journal wrote about, they were attempting to demonstrate to their employees that that is not the case, that it can be done, that it's good, that it's wise, that it was good for the family, it was good for the marital relationship. And the folks in the company stepped up and filled in. This is a company of only 30 people, so it's, I don't know, seems like it would be a tough call to be able to do it. But let me just read from this piece in the Journal. Mindful of the benefits, many employers are expanding parental leave offerings for men, encouraging them to take it, as we said. None is going farther than Olark, this 30-employee provider of live chat software. Both co-founders of the company, CEO Ben Carlton and COO Matt Pizzametti, took more than 3 months off with their newborns this year at the same time. Can you imagine? And what do you think about paternity leave? Do you think it's a good idea? When I had my kids, one of them, my husband basically left the hospital and went to work the morning after I had the baby. And dads they didn't really stay home when the newborn was there. They just went to work and earned the money. And I was fine with that because I just wanted to know that we had a good income coming in so that we could take care of these kids. But I think it was probably exhausting for the dad, and certainly there's some lack or loss in the bonding between the father and the kids, and I think that's partly what these paternity leave policies are about. Taking paternity leave, according to the Journal here, tends to increase new parents' satisfaction with their relationship, easing the marital strain that often follows childbirth, according to a study published in April in the Journal of Marriage and Family. Do you think so? Do you think that paternity leave actually would ease the relationship between mom and dad, take some of the pressure off? All of this comes after a 2016 study of paternity leave in 11 nations, showing that extending a father's leave to 1 month or more tends to make men more assertive in parenting rather than deferring to mothers. This company, Olark, is a profitable company, and it ranks second on a top 10 list of high-quality live chat software providers. So it's been a successful company. These two owners and top executives there felt that this was something they wanted to add to this company, and that was a really good paternity leave policy. The workers there found that life at work didn't go off the rails with the bosses gone. Although they had a few challenges and issues. Mr. Pismani, one of them, says he kept office hours on Monday during his leave, so he actually did go in 1 day a week. But otherwise, he tried to avoid getting involved with work, and it did encourage other managers' workload. Sometimes they were saying, yikes, I don't know if I can handle this, but they seemed to get through it, and The experience, according to the Wall Street Journal, bolstered employees' confidence in their ability to solve problems. When employees see the CEO and COO use our parental leave policy and have faith it's going to work, they think, hey, I can do the same thing. I need to. So, I guess my question is, do you think that that is really true? Do you think men could get over their fear of losing ground at work and take a month, 2-3 months off to be home with their newborn? I think that we're in a period right now where companies are beginning to offer these things. I don't think it should be forced on us by the government, but let's just talk about it. Give us a call, 800-351-1212. We're taking your calls, and we'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm Penna Dexter, and this is Point of View. We're taking your calls at 800-351-1212. We're talking right now about paid family leave, and this Wall Street Journal article yesterday kind of gave me the spark to want to talk about it. Unpaid leave, of course, has been mandated for a while. 88% of workers have access to unpaid leave, but as the journal mentions, that costs money, and a lot of people just can't afford to take time off or take very much time off without pay. But we just want to know what you think about paid family leave, especially for dads. I mean, the moms, it makes sense. They're going to breastfeed for a while. It's difficult to manage that sometimes when you're working full time. But giving it to dads, too, I mean, there are benefits to the relationship between kids and dads, but yet some dads are afraid because of career concerns to take it, or they don't want to take it because they don't want to slow things down at work. Let's see. There's a few states who actually mandate paid family leave. New York, New Jersey, California, Rhode Island offer paid family leave. And Washington, Massachusetts, and the District of Columbia are preparing to roll out similar programs. But, should that be up to the employer, or should the state force that on the employers? I think it should be left up to employers and sort of encouraged, because, we're in a time now of pretty much full employment. So to keep good employees, companies want to implement certain policies. But I think it's too much to mandate it from the state level. What do you think? 800-351-1212. Let's go to Carol in California. Hi, Carol. You're on Point of View. Thanks for calling in.
Sure. I was calling regarding is this paid or unpaid? Because if you're on the lower end of the pay scale, it would be next to impossible to have the breadwinner be taking this huge chunk of time off.
Unpaid.
Yeah, unpaid. I think now in California, which is where I'm from, is it mandated across the board that every business has to give?
That's what this journal article seems to say. I don't know. You're there, so have you got any idea about that?
I really don't. I'm sorry, but I will say that for the small business, that could be very crippling to have to pay that out and not have the person there, and having maybe to hire a temp or, have other expenses. So it's one more reason for some states like California where there's just so much put on small business that a lot of them are leaving if they can. But I can see the benefit of having the father home for a while because of the bonding issue. Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword as far as, how do you balance this and make it work, but at the same time, don't be adding so much on to business, whether it be small or large. And I think that when men start to see that it doesn't hurt to take some time off of work, especially if they say take a month and not, say, 3 months, it's not going to hurt their career. I don't see where it would. It's just not that long of a time.
Yeah. Well, it really I think your instinct about small businesses is correct. And I'm sure there's a number of employees limit on California. And these, because,
probably.
Maybe 50 or whatever. I don't know what that is. I haven't seen that in this article, but it might be there somewhere. But,
right.
And if anybody's from California and knows more about the law in their, or any state, any of these states that I mentioned, New Jersey, California, Rhode Island, New York, Rhode Island, offer paid family leave. So is there a limit of the number of employees? But Carol, I think you're right, but I also think that there's just something to be said for letting companies make these decisions.
Oh, I completely agree. And I think, too, that the market, as more companies offer it, and like you say, especially right now when there's such high employment rate, that it would behoove a lot of companies to offer it. And then that way government's not mandating it, it's just done by the people, and that's the way things should be done.
Absolutely. I'm noticing, ladies and gentlemen, that there are certain big companies that have very well-established paid family leave systems, like, for instance, Cisco system. They implemented their policy in 2017. They have a minimum of 13 weeks paid parental leave for primary caregivers, regardless of gender. And so that's increased men's average time off in the U.S. to 5.9 weeks for Cisco. So men are taking it, but they're not taking the full 13 weeks.
Right. There you go.
Yeah. Listen, thanks, Carol. I appreciate your comment. I think I'm right there with you on that. And a couple more companies. Bank of America is seeing a sharp increase in new dads taking time off since it expanded paid parental leave to 16 weeks in 2016. Another company, American Express, promotes its 2017 expansion of paid parental leave to 20 weeks. They call it their Don't Miss a Moment campaign aimed at fathers. And then this co-owner that we mentioned of this company, I forget the name of it now, but his name is Mr. Pismetti, and he was surprised to find that he had little time to tackle some projects he planned at home. So he was going to take the full 3 months off, and he did take the full 3 months off, but he thought, well, I'm going to help take care of the kids, but I'm also going to get some projects done around the house. He found he didn't have much time to do that. It's one thing intellectually to understand that full-time parenting is difficult, but until you do it yourself, you don't really have full empathy for how much of a mental load it is. It is amazing how little you can get done when there's a dependent, tiny little baby there. Yes, they do sleep. Sometimes you need to sleep during those times, too. So we are talking about paid family leave. I do want to kind of set us up also for the next segment when we talk about these adversity scores. We've got a caller on that. So let's go to James in Missouri. James, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, I have a strong opinion about this alternation of the SAT scores.
Let's hear it.
I've been teaching, and I've been a student and all this. And I've seen students that seemed to be kind of handicapped that would be given breaks, I guess would be a good way to say it, on things like that. And
like they're given a break in actual taking of the test, or they're given more time, or what?
No, they let them in classes that they can't do. It was over their head.
Okay, so we're not talking SAT here. We're just talking about education in general.
Oh, I was always talking about a while ago about giving kids some kind of special thing where they come add points to their SAT.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Handicapped.
And that's what you're talking about too. Go ahead.
That's
I'm sorry.
I'm talking about. I've seen this in the past where students who were given special privilege and they end up wasting their time. I know that there's some people that do this stuff, but the thing is, I think the SAT test tells the ability of the student. They shouldn't have to alter just because somebody's broke. They might have a scholarship for broke people, but don't alter the SAT score, because that's a true indicator of how the student's going to do.
Yeah, it's
if
worked
they
well.
alter the score.
It's worked well over the years. James, thank you so much for your call. We're coming up on a break, but I think, as someone who's watched this over the years, I think he's making some sense. We're going to unpack this a little bit more after the break, and we will continue to take your calls on this SAT adversity score. My guest will be Lowell Ponte, and so you won't want to miss that. Stay with us. And again, our number is 800-351-1212. We are taking your calls. There are 2 articles on this issue posted at pointofview.net, so you can check those out and also take full advantage of our donate button. I hadn't mentioned that in today's show yet, but we certainly do depend on the gifts of our listeners. We're a listener-supported program. We really have no other way of keeping our broadcast going, so we ask you to participate with that, and we welcome it. Stay with us for more Point of View. We'll be back after these messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've already started the conversation about the SAT adversity score, and we've got lots of you calling in wondering about this and how it's going to work. It's really the College Board, which is the organization who administers the SAT, planning to use a new set of metrics alongside the SAT scores, which assigns weights to an applicant's really socioeconomic background. And I did see an article, we've actually posted it, by Heather McDonald, who is at the Manhattan Institute. She's been a guest on the program before. And she's writing at length about this. And she says the College Board's adversity score will give students a boost for coming from a high-crime, high-poverty school and neighborhood. Being raised by a single parent, she says, will also be a plus factor. Such a scheme penalizes the bourgeois values that make for individual and community success. There's a lot more from Heather McDonald. You can see it at pointofview.net. But with me now to discuss this, I want him to just really unpack it, first of all, is Lowell Ponte. And he is, he does a lot of things, but he is a co-author with Craig R. Smith of numerous books, including Money, Morality, and the Machine, and also The Future Looks Like Baltimore. He's also been a reporter in Washington, D.C., a legislative aide in the California Assembly. He's been one of two co-owners of a successful Hollywood public relations firm, and also a consultant and speaker for various corporations and trade associations, and also the dean of a distance learning university. So he knows a lot about education. He's a native of Southern California, and he's been a talk show host, actually, for more than 17 years. Lowell, thank you for joining me.
I know, what a great honor, and I think Dexter is a wonderful name.
Well, thank you very much.
It derived from what? The Latin dexterus, meaning basically right-handed or right.
Okay, well, wow, you know a lot. Yes, I am right-handed, and I'm also on the right. I'm right about most things. Just ask my kids.
Guess what the appropriate word for a left-handed person is in that same tradition?
What is
Sinister.
it?
Sinister.
Dexter and sinister.
Yes.
I think I'd rather be a Dexter. All right, Lowell, let's talk about this adversity score issue. I've been seeing lots of articles about it in the past couple of weeks, and to many of our listeners, I think this sounds a little sketchy. So explain why we need this, or do we need it?
Well, you may not need it, but the people who want it is liberal universities and colleges, who like the idea of creating their own kind of diversity, their own multiculturalism in their schools based on something other than just merit. The problem is, so far, California and Florida have already technically banned colleges from using racial preferences to pick their student body, and they're afraid the Supreme Court now has cases coming down the line that are going to cause that Supreme Court to say it will now be illegal for any college in any state to explicitly use race as a factor in why they choose someone. So, conveniently, the College Board has created this new standard. It doesn't mention race at all, but it does give a lot of indicators of whether someone is privileged, that is, likely to be white, or is coming from, that is, they're coming from well-to-do parents, good neighborhoods, low-crime neighborhoods and schools, and so on, or whether they are disadvantaged, coming from poor families, high-crime neighborhoods, and bad schools, which I guess they're using as an implicit marker of whether they are coming from minority neighborhoods. That's not an absolute, but it does give them something to go on that allows them to be able to pick students with a much higher probability of getting what they wanted in the first place without breaking a new law.
So are any colleges using this at this point, or is this just coming in the fall?
We've been experimenting with it at Yale and other schools for about 2 to 3 years. In the fall, there will be at least 150 colleges that will be using it to boost admissions of applicants who had the pluck to overcome that sort of adversity. And you can see where that does represent an achievement, but this too can be beaten if you are a millionaire Hollywood star and you wish to cheat your student, your child, into school. For example, as Tucker Carlson said on Fox the other day, all you need to do is rent your child an apartment in Harlem and make that your child's official address, and then your child will automatically be classed as having adversity and high crime and so on.
So, getting back to race, I mean, it's illegal to consider racial preferences, and that's becoming more and more apparent. So this is a way to sort of signal the race, correct?
Right, even though race is a very tricky thing to deal with. In the first place, it's an artificial human construct. It doesn't strictly really exist at all. But if you're going to look at it, take the average African American in the United States today. They have between 14 and 27% Caucasian genes in their DNA. Why do they have them? Because of centuries of the horrifying tradition of rape that came before the Civil War. So there is a huge admixture. And so when you deal with the average African-American black and you say this person deserves reparations for what his ancestors went through, understand you will also be rewarding the genes of the white slave owner.
Yeah.
When you give him
well,
reparations.
Barack Obama is sort of an example there. I mean, does Barack Obama deserve reparations?
Well, his entire family tradition is from Kenya, we're told. And interestingly, you ask, why did he rush to send back the statue of Winston Churchill? There's an easy answer. His family was a Muslim slave-owning family in Kenya. They owned a lot of slaves, and when the British moved in, they abolished slavery. And so the Obamas suddenly became slave poor, quite unlike what they had been for many generations up till then. So there's almost a revenge motive against the British Empire in Obama's family.
Interesting. Okay, we just have about a minute before the break, and we are taking your calls at 800-351-1212. We've already got folks calling in, and Lowell Ponte is my guest. And Lowell, you mentioned in your article, which we posted at pointofview.net, the original Scholastic Aptitude Test, the SAT, was invented in 1926, and the gentleman who invented it, Carl Brigham, who is a Princeton alumnus, was an avowed eugenicist. So he had a motive in creating this. This I did not know.
Yes, and according to Sidney Fussell, writing in the Atlantic magazine on this, he created the test to uphold a racial caste system in the country. Fussell writes that Brigham believed standardized tests would prove the racial superiority of white Americans. Testing, wrote Brigham, would prevent the continued propagation of defective strains in the present population, the infiltration of white blood into the Negro. Now, progressives, I write, like Brigham, like socialist Adolf Hitler, like Margaret Sanger, the Planned Parenthood founder, who lectured the Ku Klux Klan about using abortion to curtail African Americans, they were zealous believers in eugenics. And indeed, today's blacks comprise about 12.5% of the American population, but they account for more than 25%, in some cases up to 40% of all abortions.
Okay, let me jump in because we've got a break, but we need to continue in this vein. Does the SAT still serve that purpose that was just described? That would be another question for my guest, and we're taking your calls, 800-351-1212.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The plight of persecuted Christians is worse than ever. That is the conclusion of a recent report by Aid to the Church in Need. It documents that persecution of Christians today is worse than at any time in history. Not only are Christians more persecuted than any other faith groups, but ever-increasing numbers are experiencing the very worst forms of persecution. In some countries, the situation is already severe, so it's hard to imagine how it could be any worse. Other countries, like China, have seen intolerance on the rise, as evidenced by a clampdown on dissident clergy and the destruction of churches. In light of this, I was deeply convicted by my recent interview with Johnny Moore. He came on Point of View to talk about his book, The Martyr's Oath. He begins the book, and we began our interview by talking about attending a Bible school graduation ceremony. The students repeated this martyr's oath in which they pledged their lives and death to Jesus. He felt like he was standing in the book of Acts, witnessing a raw first-century Christianity that had been shielded from him in America. It says things like, "As he has given his life for me, so I'm willing to give my life for him. I will use every breath I possess to boldly proclaim his gospel." It later goes on to say, "Though persecution may come, I know my battle is not against flesh, but against the forces of evil. I will not hate those whom God has called me to love. Therefore I will forgive when ridiculed, show mercy when struck, and love when hated." Johnny Moore often asks himself, why are so few of us in America willing to live for Jesus when others are so willing to die for him? It's a good question all of us should ask ourselves. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest is Lowell Ponte. We're talking about the SAT adversity score that is really being proposed and beginning to be implemented by colleges. And I guess the question, Lowell, is does the SAT in fact give an unfair advantage to middle-class white students? That seems to be the given here in implementing this, doesn't it?
Well, that would be the argument. Of course, the most recent cases of bias we've seen at universities is Harvard University being sued by Asian Americans who say they are very unfairly turned away when, in fact, they have higher test scores, they have higher grade point averages than most other groups that apply there. And yet the school takes the attitude, you're 2.3% of the population or whatever, we are not going to bend over backward to make you half the student body at Harvard. We're going to have our own kind of diversity. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they want anything that allows them to move away from meritocracy. I mean, if you basically have a leftist view, you don't want people advanced by having merit. You want them advanced by some arbitrary standard of race or other measure that the governance of the school can control. So, yes, probably the SAT is biased in favor of white culture because those traditionally have been the people who write the test. But in theory, it could certainly be passed. I mean, the highest SAT scores in the country are generally achieved by Asian Americans, often from families where they only began speaking English a few years ago. And yet they have such an intense work ethic, such an intense desire to achieve academically that they do. And that, of course, is an embarrassment to people who have been here all along and don't.
Yeah, I think, and folks, tell me if you agree with me or not. We're taking your calls at 800-351-1212, but it feels like this is another tool of the left, in a sense, to take something that has actually worked in this country to predict how students will do in college. And after all, isn't that what this is supposed to be about? Is to see who will do well in college, who will benefit from college, rather than just who would get the privilege of going to college. It should be about who will actually benefit. Because a lot of times you allow someone to take a spot in a top-tier university who's not ready. It's not good for that student because they struggle. So Lowell, just talk a little bit about this, because it feels like it's just taking something that's been institutionally actually fairly beneficial and destroying it as we destroy so many other things.
Oh, sure. There are people who achieve from poor schools, from a poor academic background, but they do well. And then they are put into a Harvard or a Yale or whatever, and they're simply not equipped to compete at that level. And so they find themselves under a great deal of pressure to survive and achieve. And yet, even if they graduate, people look at them and say, well, you're only here because you were shown racial favoritism. Therefore, your degree doesn't really count anyway. So they're cheated in several ways. You're right. The question is, if you have students coming from a lot of different schools across the country, some where grading is easy, some where grading is hard, some where academics are taken very seriously, some where they're almost ignored, and everything is devoted to the football team, what then do you use as a standard that you can gauge them all by? The SAT may be very imperfect, but at least it's one standard where everybody can be compared to everybody else in terms of what they know and what they achieve. And so that was the ideal of it. That is one reason why more and more schools were actually dropping the SAT. So by adding this new factor, the SAT is trying to make itself more saleable, more acceptable at more universities, because they give them a way around what may soon be the law.
Can you explain how the adversity score would work? Because I'm reading that there are 15 factors that would be included in it, and I have not mentioned all 15, so I think folks need to know how complex this is.
Oh, it's fairly complex, but the point is how it works depends on the admissions officers. They will look at it. They will see, for example, that you came from a high-crime school, and then they imagine that you were likely to be shot walking home from school every day, and that this factored into your mental state, what you had to overcome in order to achieve anything, and so on. Now, the fact is, you may have been walking in a direction where that wasn't a concern at all, where you weren't at risk of being shot, where there wasn't high crime where you were going. It also, by the way, creates a disincentive to parents who might want to work hard and move into a better neighborhood or achieve more.
Now everybody will flock to the poor neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. Whenever they talk about creating, what's the term for them? Incentivized financial districts, economic opportunity zones in the inner city and so on. There's only one problem with having an opportunity zone, though it will indeed attract more investment than if it weren't a special low-tax zone. And that is, from the government's point of view, you have to keep everything around it a non-opportunity zone with higher taxes and so on. I would like to see all of America made into an opportunity zone. I mean, that's what our founders, our ancestors, were all about when they came here. In fact, we talk about American exceptionalism. Research in recent years has suggested that may actually have a genetic basis, because once upon a time, not that long ago, only about 2% of human beings ever moved 25 miles from where they were born. Almost everybody just stayed put. And as a result, those people who did pull up stakes and come as far as the United States seeking religious or economic freedom and opportunity, they were an exceptional people. And it turns out that genetically they do have certain genes that predispose most Americans to be dissatisfied with the degree of freedom they've had elsewhere, to want to look over the next hill, to find the grass greener on the next hill, and so on. It is a kind of driving gene to achieve and to explore and to engage in entrepreneurship.
It seems like this would discourage that.
Well, that's the point. Our ancestors came here because we had freedom. What we're doing now with this increasing emphasis on socialism is we're turning the U.S. into the kind of land your ancestors and mine fled to get away from.
How sad.
And unfortunately for the government, that will either kill us off by stress, and you will notice, by the way, that especially among Caucasians, Americans are now dying younger than they used to. Other racial groups are not, but Caucasians are dying younger. That's been the case for the last 3-4 years in this country, mainly from drug use, overdoses, and suicide.
Wow, so you're
that
outlining
suggests that we're under a great deal more stress than we were in the prior to that. But this means that those who are truly entrepreneurial in the U.S. are perfectly capable of pulling up stakes and moving to the next country that offers freedom and opportunity.
Well, getting back to just the incentives, I guess, that this creates, because, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the SAT adversity scores. And do you think the SAT needs to be tweaked? Do you think it needs to be given, in a sense, students who are from less backgrounds socioeconomically, that they need to get sort of a boost so that the college can consider that background when looking at their application? And that's really the question here. And you can see, in a sense, why some people might support that in the name of quote unquote fairness. But as our guest Lowell Ponte has mentioned, this provides a disincentive to, in some senses, hard work, the whole meritocracy system that we've been based upon that encourages entrepreneurship, that encourages parents to provide the best educational opportunities for their young children growing up. There are disincentives here now, because if you are from a crime-ridden neighborhood, you actually have an advantage for getting into college. So do you think this is a good idea in the sense of fairness or a bad idea? 1-800-351-1212. One thing that I want to ask you, Lowell, with regard to this, and you're going to have to answer it after the break, but you look at students that have a desire to be perhaps an engineer or be in one of the STEM fields, and they get in based on this adversity score, and they find themselves struggling, and so they've got to move to an easier major. What about that disincentive? It seems like this is just rife with disincentives to achievement. We are taking your calls, 800-351-1212. You could read these two articles, one by Lowell Ponte and also one by Heather McDonald on the SAT adversity score. I think this is a big issue, bigger than what we think at first blush. So let's consider it together. We'll be right back after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And my guest is Lowell Ponte. We are discussing the SAT adversity score. And what it does is alter the way colleges use the SAT. Students will now be assigned adversity scores of 1 to 100 using 15 different metrics regarding their background. The more disadvantaged a student is judged to be, the more points will be added to his or her score. It's up to the college how they use this, but the students won't know what their score is. The colleges will be the ones that know. Some people are saying this will make the SAT effectively meaningless and will strip colleges and universities of their remaining credibility. And, of course, the College Board, who administers the SAT, is ranking students based on this. And some people are saying this is the next step down the slippery slope of identity politics. We are taking your calls on this issue. Let's go now to Arizona and speak with Peter. Hi, Peter. You're on Point of View. Thanks for calling in.
You bet. I just, first of all, to give you a background, we've homeschooled our kids, and they're pretty intelligent. They do well. But I think this is a really, really bad idea because, for example, my son, who's always been bright and does well, he is at BYU in Provo in engineering, and it's tough. If you don't have what it takes, it's a recipe for disaster, both for the colleges and for the kids, because, I mean, he's bright, and he was just, struggling with the math, and he's good at math. And he, he pulled it off and still get decent grades. But then they would make the colleges either have to lower their standards, which then if you lower your standards for engineering, guess what? It's tough because it has to be tough because either you're right or you're wrong. And if you make a mistake in engineering, there's some big consequences. Look at Boeing and their 737. That was quite a very costly oops with their computers and their engineering.
Well, the repercussions of this kind of thinking, they rise to the highest levels, don't they?
Oh, they
absolutely.
do.
I'll give you another good example.
Okay, well, Peter, I was asking Lowell.
You bet.
Let's let Lowell respond, and we'll go back to you.
Oh, no, that's okay. But a few years ago, the engineers plotting the path of a spacecraft around the moon miscalculated and crashed the spacecraft. You can imagine how much that cost in dollars and cents. However, in the New York Times, they recently quoted Thomas Chatterton Williams, who said this: "Like my African-American father, I used to believe that hard work and mastery of a standardized exam was the fairest way for students like me to compete with those who had far more resources." But about what he called the SAT's bogus adversity score in the May 17th New York Times, that the College Board will now manipulate the outcome with no transparency, giving people no ability to see what their adversity score even is, and yet have that a basis for judging them, is a chilling step in the wrong direction, he said. And I think that's more than reasonable. So this is just another way to allow the colleges to play political games with this, to introduce some standard that the student really can't control, and that God only knows how it will be judged. No one will be able to look at it and analyze it. So is it truly fair? Is it reasonable? Who knows?
I'm struggling to understand why the colleges are buying into this.
Well, as we said, they're going to face a situation in the near future, they fear, where they can no longer use race overtly as a standard in selecting students. And they may very well find themselves, therefore, admitting virtually no African Americans or no Latinos to a new class simply because they didn't have any way of isolating those people and giving them favoritism to let them in. Often, these people come from families that have very little motive by the parents to, and this, ironically, this is why it's so impressive to hear someone like your caller, because Peter works very hard to help his children, to encourage them to study and work hard. And that is the single most important key in how students do on the SAT, unless they're Hollywood stars who are hiring people to take the test for your kids. It is the amount of motivation you've given them to learn and to think. And if they are raised in families that don't have particularly, the average African-American inner-city student in this country is often faced with a situation where you bring home a report card, and if you get 3 or 4 A's, they'll look at you and say, what are you doing acting white for?
That's really sad.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what these kids are up against. And they're often very bright kids, but they're strongly discouraged from academic achievement. Whereas if you look at Asian Americans, if you look at Jewish Americans, if you look at Caucasian Americans, they're often on the other side of that kind of calculation, where even if they're only mediocre students, they're encouraged to do their best, and that lifts them above average.
Peter, talk a little bit about what you did with your family, because the things that you did don't just apply to white middle-class people. This is something that could be encouraged for the black society. I mean, I know so many black families who they're so over the top, requiring discipline among their kids, probably to overcome this, that their kids do very well. So there are strategies that we have, and I think school choice might be another one, but just talk about some of the things that you did to encourage your son to get where he's gotten.
Well, really, I think it's more my wife and me. I'm a sole provider for my family. I've been a realtor for 24 years, and I worked and she nurtured the kids and taught them well. Like my second daughter, who's going to be applying to college, just got a 34 out of 36 on her ACT, top 1% in the nation. And all we did was focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic. My wife did. We let them interact. We encouraged them to read. We encouraged them to think critically, to seek for truth, and to question. And that builds your mind. It builds your mind power, your critical thinking. And that's what we don't find in most public schools, unfortunately. I'm sure I'm offending many people by saying that, but that was one of our major reasons for homeschooling.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lowell, we're losing this and we're becoming, it's a sense we're watering down college. And it used to be that people who did well merited going to college, but now everyone thinks they have a right to go to college. And that's part of this, isn't it?
Well, it's funny because there are a lot of jobs in this country, blue-collar jobs, that make very good income, that people can learn welding or whatever, not go into tens of thousands of dollars of debt to start their lives out with, can immediately go into work at high pay. The idea that everyone has to go to college is kind of a newfangled idea in our culture, but we've made college a place where you can shunt people. For example, during the Obama administration, a lot of young people were shunted to college for a simple reason. If they were put into college, they were not counted as unemployed. So Obama could say, well, these people are working. No, they're not working. They're taking basket weavings 200 at the local community college. But, these are the kind of things. And also, of course, college is one of the institutions of the left. You look at Pete Buttigieg, whose father was a Marxist theorist in college, whose father was the editor of the Antonio Gramsci series of prison notebooks, very important in Marxist theory, who was raised as a red diaper baby to be a weapon put out into American politics, as were so many others. And you realize that a lot of this is manipulation. College is one of those institutions that Gramsci said modern Marxists would triumph by conquering. And so instead of trying to start a revolution, they just decided they would march through the institutions and take over universities, take over television, take over movie making, take over book publishing, and so on. So the major cultural institutions are all teaching an anti-American, largely Marxist or socialist message. And that will gradually undermine U.S. culture, and we will just collapse from within once our culture is eaten up. And when you see that done, as is all too often happening, you realize that when you send your kid to college, what's he going to learn? He's going to learn Revolution 101. He's going to be in debt for Antifa
the rest of his life for learning it. Listen, Lowell, thank you so much for sort of trying to clarify that. Peter, thank you for your call. We appreciate your joining us and talking about sort of your strategies. And I think, Lowell, that's part of this. After the break, we're going to have to talk about, is it possible to push back against this kind of thing, or is it just way too late in our culture? We do have some folks
sure.
waiting.
And I'd like to help push back by giving your audience a gift if they want to get paper and pencil.
Okay, well, let's do that after the break. And we do have other folks on the line that want to ask questions. So we'll take your calls after the break. And I do want to send you to pointofview.net to learn more about this subject and all the guests we've had on the program today. Just go to pointofview.net. Stay with us. We've got more after the break. We're going to try to pack it in here at the end of the show. So we'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to the final segment of Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. This whole idea of the SAT adversity score really shows us how much we've come into this battle between identity politics versus individual achievement, and identity politics seems to be winning in many of these issues. My guest is Lowell Ponte, and let's take a quick call. Let's go to Whitey in Nevada. Hi, Whitey. Thanks for calling in.
Oh, thank you for your program. It's very good. By the way, I got 4 nephews studied in England, London. 2 engineering, 1 chartered accountant, and 1 chartered architect. I got 2 nephews studying in Australia, Sydney, Australia. 1 doctor, a lawyer, and a chartered accountant. You say, how come 2 and got 3 degrees? Well, the doctor did one. The other brother, the other nephew did two. Law and accounting. If you apply the system, you have it here, the system will stack against them. Number one. Number two, to make things...
what nationality are they?
Chinese.
Okay.
So the system will stack against them.
Yes, it is. Isn't it, Lowell?
So on top of that...
Okay.
Yeah, on top of that, if you want to make things politically correct, let's put it this way. Let me give you a definition I learned. To make things politically correct is nothing more than an admission of the bankrupt secular society. There's no logical authority on which to ground it. How about that?
How about it, Lowell?
Well, you have to understand everything benefits somebody in some way. The people who want to control the rest of us, to be the ruling elite, to turn the university into basically a propaganda mill, which is what it's largely now. That is part of their strategy, their long-run strategy, to undermine this country to make way for a global government. Because the U.S., especially if we're making America great again, is a threat by asserting itself as a nation against global governance. This is the same problem England had when the British 3 years ago woke up and found that 63% of all their laws and regulations weren't being made by the people they elect anymore. They were being made by bureaucrats in Brussels under the European Union, which is like a globalist sort of dictatorship. And by the way, which now wants to do away with NATO and create its own army to prevent people from leaving the European Union. It's interesting how history turns that way.
It is amazing. It's only been in our generation that they formed the European Union.
And the funny thing is, we largely created that because we put our nuclear umbrella over Europe after World War II, so they didn't have to spend money on national defense. They were being protected by our nuclear weapons. So what did they spend the money on? Welfare. They built these huge welfare states that are now the envy of leftists here. But they're not necessarily socialist. For example, just a few months ago, the Prime Minister of Denmark gave a speech in which he said, Senator Bernie Sanders, stop calling Denmark socialist. We are not a socialist country. We don't want to own the means of production. We love rich people. We give more trade freedom to our people than you give to yours in the United States. We just happen to have high taxes and high welfare benefits, but we're not socialist.
Yeah, all of that is paid for with their free enterprise businesses. Listen, let's go back to this SAT issue since we're getting close to the end. We've got some callers, but
don't let me forget to give them.
I wanted you to do that now.
Oh, sure. The gift is I have written 7 books with Craig Smith. Craig you see on every week with Neil Cavuto on Fox Business. Our latest is called Money, Morality, and the Machine. It's a very enlightening 250-page book. We'll give it to all of your listeners absolutely free and postpaid. It will not cost you a penny. Just call toll-free 800-630-1492, like the Air Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's 800-630-1492, and I know you'll love it.
Okay, Bonnie's waiting on the line, and she's from Nevada. Bonnie, what's your question?
You were wondering, like, why the colleges would do that. Why would they change their minds? But if you look at it as a big whole, they're pushing for, free college for all. So if they have this new score, they can say, look, all these people, they need college. You're holding them back. We need to change the law so that we can get free college. So these people who are at a disadvantage can get to college. And then once they get everybody free college, then they have a whole new audience of people who totally believe in their agenda.
Interesting thought, Lowell. What do you think?
That's a lot of it. That's a lot of it. That's part of what they're doing. They're also creating a huge institution, sucking up a lot of government money, that keeps raising, college is inflating in the cost of going there faster than anything else. Now you have kids get out of college, they're $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 in debt. They can't buy a house. They feel they can't get married and start a family. So the U.S. population, for the first time, is no longer able to replenish itself. We're down to about 1.84 babies per couple. You need 2.1 babies per couple just to maintain your population. So they're literally killing the United States. They're weakening us.
Wow.
And by the way, I'm not against college. I'm just saying children nowadays, it would be wonderful if you went out and explored the world a little bit, found out what you really want to do. You see, in my generation, the saying was, you have to be in college or you'll be in Vietnam. That was the choice young men were given. And so a whole lot of people went to college who didn't really want to be there or who changed their major half a dozen times because they didn't know what they wanted to study. They just knew they had to stay in college. And that made a whole lot of people unhappy and protesters.
Yeah, college, in a sense, should be a means to an end, rather than having so many strategies for getting to college. College should help you, should advance your standing so that you can pursue the field that you want to be in. But it seems like sometimes, Lowell, we've got it backwards.
Oh, sure. And as the Bible says, you should honor every person's honest work. I mean, this idea that people who've been to college are good and people who haven't been to college are bad is ridiculous. I mean, often it's the blue-collar workers who are the body and soul of the United States. In fact, this is interesting. When they did studies many years ago, having kids live for a month or two or three in an artificial totalitarian state in high school, like Triangula or whatever, they found that the kids who most readily became totalitarians were the A and B students, because they were the ones used to conforming to whatever the teacher told them to believe in. The kids who were most like the American patriots at Valley Forge and who fought against that and fought against the state getting larger, they were the D and F students.
Interesting.
They were the ones used to being rebellious. So who is the real American? Well, I think there's room for all of us if we'll just realize the wonderful thing we have to lose here. If we sacrifice our faith, if we sacrifice our own dignity and individualism.
Lowell, you are filled with good information. We thank you so much for joining us today. Sounds like all the books that you have written are really going to be helpful for people, co-authored, I guess, with Craig Smith. And thank you so much for joining us today. I didn't know you before, and it's nice to know you and know how you sort of have some wisdom that helps us understand some of the crazy things that are happening, especially in the field of education. So I appreciate your joining me today.
And Penna, it's wonderful that, like Kirby, you too hold aloft the light that lets people see their way to freedom and dignity, and that's a very good thing. God bless you.
God bless you. That's a great note to end on, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for listening. I also want to thank you, Doug, for helping out today, and also Karen and also Steve for producing this show. And I'll be back on Friday for our weekend edition. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.